This is not romance, this is trauma bonding with a luxury office. He displays classic domination through silence, proximity, and selective emotional withdrawal. He conditions her to crave the very attention he withholds. She, meanwhile, is pulled into a psychological loop where fear, attraction, dependence, and danger begin to merge. Then the pregnancy triggers a possession response, not a partnership response. He does not ask, he declares, and when the kidnapping happens, the most chilling possibility emerges. Not that he failed to protect her, but that his system of control may have created the entire cage around her.
This is where the story shatters. She buried the truth of it all. The night, the emotional wreckage, the child she carried. Alessia thought she could vanish, erase every trace of herself from his world. But he trapped her, a predator assured of his prey. His words, a simple cage, "You're not going anywhere." Then came the final claim, "This baby is mine." Her free will dissolved into nothing. I am Alessia at the edge of the fall. Chapter 1, the omen she refused to see. The day began as a perfect deception, flawless coffee, a flawless sky, a gilded cage. Her blazer was flawless, the ink on the contract barely dry. The position she'd chased for 2 years was finally hers, the salary doubled. Her new office, just a 20-minute commute. Clutching her portfolio, she moved through the city, certain the shattered mosaic of her life was reforming. Her first call had to be Lorenzo, her anchor since the age of 12. He was the keeper of all her stories, the triumphs and the disasters, an unbreakable right. Some rituals can never be altered. This ritual had never felt like a risk. He picked up after 2 rings, just as she expected. "I got the job," she said, no preamble needed. "Signed the papers yesterday. It's at Viscari Holdings." Then came the silence, stretching for 3 full heartbeats. The static on the line felt heavy. She knew her brother's silences. This one was not joy. "Viscari," he echoed, the word a venomous thing. "Viscari Holdings." That's the one, she confirmed, an unbidden shiver tracing her spine. "You know them?" His reply was quiet, lethal. "I know the man who owns it." His tone instantly changed, dropping to the solemn frequency Lorenzo used only for impending disasters. It held no alarm, no theatrics, just the flat certainty of a man forecasting a collision. "Tell me," she ordered, and he did. He didn't give her everything, a truth she would only grasp in hindsight, but offered just enough to keep her from walking away. It was more than enough. Dante Viscari, age 35, ruled an empire that made his official title of CEO a hollow piece of fiction. His power was not written into contracts. It lived in quiet rumors and in obstacles that simply vanished. He was among the Mafia's most revered men. He was known as a collector of moments, not people, and it was said he never spent a night with the same woman twice. "Alessia?" Lorenzo started, his voice a careful probe against her armor. "A man like that will see you. His kind always does." She just laughed. It wasn't unkind, but the dismissive sound of a sister who'd heard 15 years of her brother's overprotective warnings. He was the brother who'd banned her from riding a bike at 13 and predicted she'd get lost on the subway at 18. He saw threats lurking everywhere. "Lorenzo," she said, her patience well rehearsed, "I'm an executive assistant. I'll be handling his calendar and files." His reply was chillingly calm, a quiet threat more potent than any yell. "You will walk into his private office every single day." "I will do my job," she maintained. "There's a line. For you there is. For him, that line may not exist." A beat of silence passed. She was quiet not from certainty, but because the cold precision in his voice had struck a chord of truth she refused to acknowledge. This wasn't drama, it was a diagnosis. "You're making me afraid of a man I don't know," she conceded. I'm arming you, he corrected. He let the weight of that sink in. He doesn't flirt, ally. He has no use for it. He uses his aura, his presence as a weapon. You'll feel it long before you can define it, and by then it's already over. She wanted to brush it off, to declare herself a capable adult who could handle a difficult boss. She tried, her voice layered with a confidence she didn't feel. It isn't about attraction, Lorenzo cut in. It's about how he operates. Whether you're interested or not has no bearing on his effect. The concepts are separate. Silence returned to the line. The sun beat down, the city's hum grew louder, and her knuckles turned white around her phone. Swear to me you'll call if something feels off, he pleaded. His voice was pure protection, all judgment gone. She took a deep breath and gave him the only truth she knew. I promise there will be nothing to feel. She meant it. It wasn't arrogance, just a deep, beautiful ignorance she would one day curse. Her next call was to Sophia, who erupted in joy and began planning a party. She never mentioned Lorenzo's warning. She locked it away in a box and walked on, high on the promise of a new beginning. She was right. A new chapter was beginning. She was fatally wrong about what waited for her behind that door. 10 stories up, Dante Viscari glanced at her file. It was procedural. He didn't read to the end before closing it and tossing it aside. Then he just sat, staring out at the city. Marco, his most trusted man, would later recall, it was the only moment he couldn't read his boss. Chapter 2. The Encounter. The Viscari Tower was a declaration in glass and steel, a structure built to dominate the skyline. The receptionist confirmed her identity, printed her badge, then paused. Good luck, the woman murmured, her smile a brittle courtesy that never touched her eyes, the usual practiced detachment. Alessia clipped on the badge and walked the elevators, hearing the 2 words as a warning. The 10th floor was unnaturally still. Not empty, but filled with the electric silence of a place where people only whisper. Other assistants watched her pass, their eyes placing silent bets on how long she'd last. She knocked, opened the door, and froze. Dante Viscari didn't look up. His pen was still, but she felt his focus on her. He knew she was there. It wasn't that he was occupied. It was a deliberate exhibition of control. He was making her absorb the weight of the room before he spoke. She stood rooted by the door, timing 45 seconds of rising anger, seeing the tactic for what it was. It was just long enough to note the smell of leather and wealth, to realize he owned the very air in the room. Then his head rose, slowly, deliberately, his gaze locked with hers. This wasn't a boss evaluating new staff. This was a collector who had just found something new and planned to examine it very, very closely. A deep, primal response flared to life inside her. Lorenzo's words echoed in her thoughts. A man like that will see you. His kind always does. She pulled her shoulders back. She made a vow in that moment. He would never see her falter. She would become a fortress of pure professionalism, anything it took. Romano, he spoke. His voice was a low, careful instrument, every syllable placed with purpose. Yes, she answered. Sit. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. The order was absolute, stripped of all politeness. The hierarchy was a tangible thing in the air, in the way he held himself, in the steady gaze that pinned her down. She sat, opened her laptop, straightened her file, and clicked her pen. The comforting rites of work. Then she locked her eyes with his, daring him to look away first. He just watched. perfectly motionless, and the silence started to fray her control. "You've read the description of your duties," he said. It was a statement of fact. It was a declaration, not a query. "I have," she confirmed, "and I've outlined a plan for the first week. If you'd like to see it." He sliced through her sentence. "Not needed," he stated flatly. "I know what matters." He looked back down at his desk, a clear dismissal. For a single heartbeat, she held his gaze, a tiny rebellion before turning on her machine. The battle lines were established. The deepest wound, his feigned ignorance of the war, or worse, his complete knowledge of it and his certainty she was no threat at all. The morning blurred by as she learned the rhythm of the office. At 11 o'clock, he said her name without raising his head, and the file was in his hand instantly. He read it, the quiet stretching a second too long. Acceptable. And then she felt it. His eyes flicked to her, a stare that was raw and unprofessional, then back to the paper. He made no effort to hide it. The truth hit her like a blow. Lorenzo had been right. This man saw her. The more dangerous truth, which she wouldn't admit for ages, was that she had seen him too. And there was no going back. Chapter 3. The suffocating atmosphere. For the first 2 months, they were in a silent war, a fight she was in long before she knew she was a soldier. It started with that first stare, that first order, and the meetings that left no record. Brief audiences with shadowy men who dissolved back into the city. Slowly, the illusion of Dante Viscari, respected CEO, started to fracture. The name Srokin materialized on a page accidentally left on her desk. It was unknown to her, but the way Marco snatched the document back, his expression a clear "forget this," told her everything. This name was dangerous. In return, she forged a creed. Professionalism as armor, formidability as a weapon, excellence as a shield. Survival demanded it. The moment she realized this office was merely a stage for a far deadlier play. Surrounded by hushed conversations and veiled meanings, she built an empire of competence. Reports landed on his desk early. His demands were met before they were voiced, and she tackled the problems everyone else fled. It was a declaration of her own sovereignty, not a plea for his praise. His expectations were brutal, the byproduct of a man who measured success in survival. Any failure on her part was met with blunt, cold assessment. But for exceptional work, his response was a heavy, weighted silence. He saw it all. His awareness was a palpable force. A merely difficult boss would have been a simple challenge to overcome. The real danger was his gaze, the focused, unnervingly deliberate way it dissected her every move. He was a man of action, not reaction. His scrutiny mirrored her own, dismantling the fiction of a simple employer-employee dynamic. Within the first month, a collection of trivialities began to form a net around her, trapping her before she recognized the threat. It began with the coffee, an unwavering daily rite, small, black, unsweetened. The ritual was the opening gambit. A coffee appeared one Monday, set apart in the break room. Her name was scrawled across it in his stark, unforgiving hand. She let her gaze rest on it for a long moment, until Carla from finance delivered a knowing whisper. "Welcome to the club." She asked no questions, just took the cup. The silence between them was absolute, but every morning after, the offering was there. A small thing easily dismissed, yet from such acorns dark forests rise. The green dress was the second sign, a piece of armor she donned when the day required a battle. It owned every space it entered. She chose it on a Thursday, 2 months in, needing its strength for a vital presentation. Dante canceled the 11 o'clock meeting without explanation. He stayed sequestered in his office, yet his gaze on her all day was altered. Not obvious, but dense, as if the pressure of his attention had been silently, deliberately increased. The truth lived in the way his eyes lingered on hers, a beat past propriety. It was in the near imperceptible hesitation after he spoke her name, a void with no purpose. It crackled in the supercharged air between them across his desk. She did not wear the green dress the next week. 2 more passed before she could face the reason. The third sign annihilated her resolve. At the end of that second month, there was a dinner with the firm's partners. Her job was to be flawlessly, silently efficient. The night was a study in precision until a partner, around 50 and deep in his cups, muttered something foul in her direction. The specific poison was lost, but the venom was unmistakable. By morning, Dante had terminated the firm's contract with him. The memo, penned by Marco, spoke of long-term strategic divergences, a hollow corporate phrase everyone understood to be a lie. And Marco Vitali, the ever-watchful third party, let a small, sharp smile touch his lips. Marco's awareness was a quiet, constant presence. He neither hid it nor used it as a weapon. She found out about the broken contract from a forwarded message. She sat staring at the screen for a long time, caught in the grip of a wild new feeling, a mix of heat and a deep, chilling fear. She gave Lorenzo a carefully edited summary of the event that evening. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she lied. The raw, unfiltered version was saved for Sophia, who offered no judgment, no easy platitudes. Sophia's method was to listen, dissect, and then return with the brutal, honest facts. By the third month, the very atmosphere in the office had changed. You could taste it in the quiet after 5, feel the current shift when he passed, hear the new gravity in his voice. An internal compass now tracked his every position. A primal sense told her when he stood, when he drew near, when he paused by her desk for a second longer than necessary. It was in his articulation of her last name, Romano. On his lips, it became something else entirely. It was never a simple summons. The way he spoke her name was a calculated trespass, the act of a man who knows the outcome of the war. Her only shield was to pretend not to notice. Then, an ordinary Wednesday afternoon fractured into something else. She was sorting papers on the conference table. The workday was ending, the space now filled with the strained silence that follows a sudden exodus. In the fading light, with the building falling silent, her focus was on a faulty report. Then she heard it. The sound of Dante's door. She had memorized the sound of his walk, the tempo, the pressure, the deliberate pace. Her subconscious had been filing it all away. His steps came toward the bookcase, right behind where she stood. The room was immense. He had 100 routes to choose from, but he took the one that brought him into her space. She can replay the moment with perfect recall. His hand touching her back, the lightest of pressures, a ghost of fingertips brushing her hip for no more than 2 seconds. It could have been an accident, except for the tiny break in his gait, a split-second stop before he moved on. It was deliberate. A silent declaration was made. She stood, the contact point on her skin now a burning brand, a mark that would not fade. And just like that, he was on the other side of the room, studying a document as if nothing had happened. He was perfectly composed, his broad frame and precise gestures giving nothing away. The silence between them was now electric with unspoken meaning. She finished her work, her movements slow and deliberate, fearing one wrong move would shatter the fragile piece. She collected her things, her bag, and left without looking back, the one thing she could not allow. The touch remained, a phantom heat that she brought with her to the restaurant. With Sophia, the words finally broke free. "He touched me," she said. Sophia set her glass down with a sudden, sharp sound. "Where?" "On my back, when he walked by." Alicia raised her glass with calculated slowness. "Alicia," Sophia said, her voice laced with that specific tone for hard, unavoidable facts. "That man does nothing by accident." She knew it, of course, had known it in that flash of insight that always comes at the worst possible time. But Sophia's words gave the knowledge a terrible weight. "What happened next?" Sophia insisted. "Nothing happened," she replied. "He's my boss." Sophia simply looked at her, a silent storm of words gathering behind her eyes. For now, Sophia finally murmured, flagging the waiter. Chapter 4: A Game of Pure Risk. By month 5, the veneer of Dante's professionalism was starting to crack. There was no evidence, nothing she could point to, just a certainty that lived in her marrow. She had become too fluent in his silent language to pretend any more. It started in the lift. They stepped in together on a Thursday, the atmosphere still heavy after a long meeting. Alone. He hit the button for the lobby, the doors slid shut, and the air instantly became too thin to breathe. She locked her gaze on the polished steel doors, her only defense. He was positioned behind her. His fragrance reached her first, a mix of wood smoke, amber, and something else she'd cataloged but could not name. Her stare was a desperate prayer for safety, but a part of her sensed the assault to come. 3 floors to go. He moved nearer, a single centimeter. In the crushing quiet of that box, 1 centimeter was enough to obliterate the line between them. "That dress is a choice," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a vibration against her back before the words even formed. It was a statement of fact. It was the verdict of a man who had seen every possible move and already knew the outcome. She did not turn, her voice perfectly even. "I wear what I like." "I'm aware," he replied, letting the silence hang before the killing stroke. "That's precisely the issue." The doors opened. She strode out as if late for a critical appointment. She was clear of his line of sight before she finally allowed herself to breathe. A lungful of air held captive since the 3rd floor. He paused for 2 full seconds before following. She didn't see it, but she felt it. Just as she could always sense his presence, she knew he stood motionless, and she knew the meaning of those 2 seconds. Their trip to Milan was set for 2 weeks out. The schedule was punishing. The logistics she'd arranged were flawless, and their suites were separate, though on the same floor. The relief she felt at that last detail was immediately followed by anger at herself. It meant she had imagined another possibility, a thought she would not permit. Day 1 was a marathon of technicalities. During one session, she saw the flaw in a partner's numbers before he did, and she corrected him. A quiet descended upon the room. Dante faced her. His mouth was a severe line, but his gaze conveyed a meaning she instinctively archived. That night, she was in the hotel bar, laptop aglow with the real intention of working for 2 more hours. A simple dress, hair undone, a glass of wine for a small victory. Then he materialized. He claimed the seat next to her, pointedly not opposite. His arm was a breath from her own, his presence an almost physical heat that always announced him. "The work is done," he murmured. I know, she said, and the laptop lid closed. Just so, without a fight or a question, a capitulation that shook her. She refused to examine it, for to think was to run, and she wanted to stay. That was the inescapable truth. They sat at the bar for 90 minutes. His words were sparse, but real, a galaxy away from the empty language of business. He spoke of his Milanese childhood, a short, seemingly unguarded admission. She committed every syllable to memory with a focus she'd spent months trying to smother. As she moved to leave, his hand settled over hers. The action was unhurried, measured, and stripped of all performance. She looked down at his hand on top of hers, its gentle pressure not a command but a statement of fact. It was a weight born of pure will, not physical strength. Her own hand stayed completely still. "You are an outlier," he observed. The sentence was a clinical assessment, lacking any romance or trickery, delivered like a scientist stating a proven fact. "That's a line for all of them," she challenged, her eyes still locked on his hand. "I do not speak to all of them," he said. And she believed him, wholly. Without hesitation or any need for proof, a visceral certainty that pulses through the body before the brain can catch up. She believed it, and that very belief was what terrified her to the bone. Back in the safety of her room, her heart beat out a code she would not translate. A call to Sophia was answered with a shriek that made her jerk the phone from her ear. Her friend's verdict was simple. She was entitled to one night, a single exception. It didn't have to mean anything. Tomorrow, the mask of the ideal assistant would be back in place, but tonight was hers for the taking. After hanging up, she stared at the ceiling for 40 straight minutes. The next day, both appeared at their meetings as impeccable creations, gliding through the hours as if the previous night had been a shared fever dream. But they both remembered, and that silent knowledge forever changed the substance of the quiet between them. Late that afternoon, the day's obligations met. He blew past the doorway where she sorted papers. His words were a directive tossed over his shoulder. "Dinner, 8 o'clock, a crucial client. Your presence is mandatory." So she went. This was just another part of the job, she told herself. The place was a small, hushed establishment, the sort where the food is an art form and the wine steward knows the owner's family history. She was prompt, arriving at exactly 8. He was by himself. "The client?" she asked, scanning the room. Dante's face was an unreadable shield that somehow gave everything away. A last-minute cancellation. She froze, her eyes fixed on him, on the table set perfectly for 2, and the wine that was already waiting for her. This was engineered, she stated flatly. He just dipped his head, a gesture more definitive than any words. "You could have told me," she said. "And you would not have come," he countered. A fair point, she admitted, and took her seat. The meal became a real conversation, flowing and unguarded, with no phones to be seen. It was a perfect continuation of the rapport from the bar. He ordered the wine without even seeing a list, a disturbing sign of how well he'd already read her preferences. A dry joke about their Milan contact drew a genuine laugh from her, and he watched her with a look she couldn't name, but it settled inside her with a tangible, profound weight. Halfway through their meal, his hand lifted to her face, unhurried, his thumb brushing a line so faintly across her cheek she thought it was her imagination. But the warmth it left was real. "You have a smile," he said, his voice dropping to that intimate frequency meant to be felt, not just heard, that you keep hidden at work. She couldn't answer. She was physically unable. the moment is one that still pursues her. His hand then slid down her neck, his fingers charting a slow, deliberate map to her shoulder. From the instant it landed, the heat of his palm through her dress was a solid, undeniable thing. She used all her willpower to keep her face a blank mask, though she felt he could see her thoughts anyway. "Dante," she said. Her own voice was alien, thicker, more breakable. He replied, his hand not moving an inch. "You are constructing this entire scenario." "Yes," he agreed with utter conviction. "I am." The stark honesty of his confession annihilated her defenses. This wasn't a game of strategy. This was a man who had cast aside all pretense. He pulled his hand back with agonizing slowness, and she spent the rest of the dinner focused only on controlling her breath. In the car on the way back, the silence that fell between them was a new entity, charged and aware. They both saw where this was heading, and neither was pretending otherwise. In that loaded silence, a raw and unforeseen intimacy took hold. As the car stops in front of the hotel, he sits without moving, a silhouette in the gloom. I watch him. He catches my eye. And that infamous control he always wields, that impenetrable fortress, a hairline crack appears. For 1 second, I saw the man behind the persona, not the ruthless Don, not the Arctic CEO, just him. I get out of the car. He follows me straight to his suite. As I'm about to say goodnight and escape, his hand clamps around my wrist. He turns me to him and takes my mouth. And let me tell you, there was no tenderness in it. It was a full-scale invasion, carrying all the compressed energy of the past 5 months. It was the culmination of every glance that lasted too long, every time our hands almost brushed. It was the sound of all the silences that had screamed between us. His mouth on mine was a key finding the one lock it was made for. My knees went weak. My hands fisted in his suit, holding on. And he just deepened the kiss, framing my face, his thumb on my jaw, grounding me as if the universe had paused. There was no air left between our bodies. He kicked the door open and pulled me through the threshold. I didn't resist. The suite was cavernous and dim, with all of Milan shimmering outside the glass. I stopped, mesmerized by the floor-to-ceiling window. He slammed the door shut. We watched our reflections in the pane, his figure advancing on mine, his eyes finding my reflection before his hand landed on the small of my back. It was a picture I knew would be seared into my brain forever. "Alicia," he said, the first time he had, not Romano. "Alicia," spoken in a way that remade my entire world. His lips were at my temple, his breath a physical warmth against my skin. "If you want to go." "I don't want to go," I replied. And that was the last logical thought I had all night. You have to understand, the Dante Viscari in that suite was not the detached boss or the formidable man in the suit. He was a man looking at me as if he'd just unearthed a priceless treasure he never knew he was seeking. He touched me with the same terrifying intensity he directs at everything. But this time, it was laced with a strange warmth so foreign it was 1,000 times more dangerous than his usual cold-blooded self. Chapter 5. The Fallout. It took several days for me to fully grasp the sequence of events, not the physical part in Milan. That, to my frustration, was painfully clear. The real mental disconnect was in seeing the domino effect that came after, in realizing how every moment clicked into a design that was there from the start. I was awake first. Milan was still a dark expanse, a galaxy of distant lights outside the window. I just lay there, absorbing the consequence of our choice. Dante was on his side, one arm reaching for the space I'd just left. So much less the dawn, so much more the man. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my dress, and escaped the bathroom. When I came back, he was awake, propped up on an elbow, watching me with a focus that sleep had not softened. Fleeing, he stated. His voice was a low, gravelly thing, deeper than usual, and it held a note of humor that completely blindsided me. I need to get my things, I said. My flight is at 3 o'clock. I'm aware of the flight time, he responded. It's 8 in the morning. He then stood, erased the distance between us, and kissed me with the slow, confident fire of a man who was in no hurry at all. One hand cupping my face, the other at my waist. The kiss just went on, methodically tearing down every sensible reason I had to pull away and become his perfect assistant again. Later, at a classic bistro, Dante showed me a part of himself I had never seen. An easy manner that felt utterly wrong for a boardroom shark. His questions were for me, the person, not the function I served. When I brought up a meeting, a genuine laugh escaped him, a sound I had heard perhaps twice in 5 months. Each time, it stirred a strange and unsettling current within me. In the airport and on the plane, we slipped back into our professional shells, though his arm grazed mine with a pressure just faint enough to be denied, but firm enough to be deliberate. When the car stopped at my building, he got out too. He watched me unlock the gate, and when I turned to bid him good night, he had closed the space where words might have lived. The second kiss was softer, more brief, his palm resting on my cheek for a single weighted beat before he was gone. He pulled back, his voice the low timbre I now knew by heart. I will see you tomorrow, Romano. Then he melted into the night. I stepped into my apartment, coat still in hand, and stood frozen in the entryway for a long moment. A foreign sensation bloomed in my chest, unnameable but warm, and it carried me into a weightless sleep I hadn't known in years. I didn't know I was saying goodbye to that version of him. The following morning, I walked into the office to find Dante already there. A statue in a dark suit, coffee poised, papers aligned, his posture unyielding, his face a void, his eyes locked on the page. An exact copy of day one. It was as though the last 5 months, Milan, the kiss on my sidewalk, all of it had been wiped clean from existence. His gaze lifted as I approached, sweeping over me with that familiar, hierarchical assessment, now entirely empty of the warmth it held just days ago. Romano, last week's report has a miscalculation in the third quarter projection. Nothing more. His tone was flat, unwavering, offering no hint that we were anything but employer and employee. I stood there for 2 seconds, the longest of my life, as the floor seemed to fall away beneath me. I went to my desk, sat, and opened my laptop. I will have it fixed by 11 o'clock. By 10, he returned, his eyes already back on his documents. And that was all. I moved through the day like an automaton, my body performing its duties while my mind reeled from the silent psychological warfare. I corrected the numbers, arranged his schedule, and answered his mail with cold professionalism. When I left at 7 that night, he never looked up. In a restaurant bathroom before meeting Sophia, I studied my reflection for 5 minutes, trying to see if I was still in one piece. I couldn't be sure. I was just a footnote in his story, I said, sinking into the chair across from her. Alesia, she started, her voice a low rasp. No, I cut in, my knuckles white around the glass, killing the conversation before it could breathe. It was one night, it's done. I'm moving on. Sophia just gave me a look that said everything. A silent debate on whether to push. She chose not to. She refilled her wine, staying until midnight, and never uttered his name again. A quiet act of loyalty. I moved on, or at least I tried to. A wall of ice formed around me, not by choice, but by necessity. It was a surgical procedure to cut out a feeling I never asked for. Our exchanges became purely functional, stripped of the heavy silences and the intense focus I had unconsciously given him. Dante noticed the shift in the atmosphere immediately. I would catch him pausing mid-sentence, his eyes darting to my face in a brief, analytical scan before he continued, his expression a mask I no longer bothered to decipher. I told myself he was indifferent. I was devastatingly wrong. I didn't know that the night had not been a singular event for him either. It was he who was staring at the ceiling, unmoored, doing what men of his kind always do. He built a fortress, and while we both waited, a change was taking root in me, making any pretense of this being nothing impossible. Chapter 6. Lorenzo finds out the sickness started in the 6th week after Milan. I had convinced myself it was just stress, the ideal culprit for my body's sudden betrayal. I blamed it on a new type of coffee. I blamed it on the crushing weight of a project that kept me at the office into the night. I kept a running list of excuses for days, but the deep physical wrongness remained. On a Tuesday, I bought a test from a pharmacy 2 blocks away from my office and took it in the restroom at lunch. I sat in the stall, clutching a piece of toilet paper for no real reason, as 2 minutes stretched into an eternity, holding the weight of a final sentence. 2 lines. Panic did not surface. Alessia Romano does not allow for panic. It was a fundamental truth of my character, and it held firm even in that sterile corporate bathroom. I stared at the 2 lines, my mind buffering, trying to make sense of what my eyes already knew. Then I hid the test in my purse, washed my hands, and met my own gaze in the mirror. The woman looking back was unchanged, the perfect blazer, the rigid posture, the controlled face. But I saw a flicker of disturbance in her eyes. It was the birth of a hurricane that would eventually make landfall. No matter what happened, I had to get out. With my bag on my shoulder, my mind was already in crisis management mode. Then, as if summoned, Lorenzo appeared at my apartment door, unannounced, an echo of our childhood. He was holding a food container like it was the most normal thing in the world. My brother knows I stop eating under pressure. "I heated this for you," he stated, walking past me as if his name was on the lease. "You forget to eat when you're troubled." I stayed glued to the couch, my laptop open, and recited the 3 standard lies. "I am fine. Do not worry. I have already eaten." Lorenzo just held my eyes for a full 30 seconds in complete silence. We have a kind of sibling telepathy. He can read my tells better than I can. After 3 decades, words aren't necessary. You can see a whole story in the way someone holds a plastic box. His look said it all. "I know your life is in chaos, so drop the act." He finally asked, "What is it?" And I shot back, "It's nothing, Lorenzo. I'm fine." He set the food down, sat beside me, and gently took the laptop from my lap. He didn't need to use force. My brother just clears the way for the inevitable explosion of truth. Silence is his sharpest tool. He wouldn't leave until he had the complete story. And so I gave it to him. It wasn't a clean telling. The words poured out in a messy flood, laying out the entire anatomy of the disaster. The night in Milan, the coffee at the airport, the kiss on the curb, the Cold War that followed at the office, and the falsified 3rd quarter report. I described the months of his calculated coldness, which I had written off as disinterest. And then the finale, the bathroom on Tuesday. the 2 lines on the plastic stick. When I was done, Lorenzo went perfectly still. It's a stillness I know intimately. It is not peace. It is the containment of a massive, destructive power. It's the posture of a man about to move, but giving me the courtesy of finishing first. He stood, crossed to the window, and stared down at the street. Then he delivered the killing blow. "I warned you." Just 2 words, but they weren't an accusation. There was no victory in his voice, only the immense pain of a man who wished he'd been wrong. He said it softly with his back to me as if carrying a great weight. "I know," was the only thing I could say. "This man," he started, but I cut him off. "Lorenzo." My voice was sharp, a clear signal. "I made a choice, too. Do not you dare paint me as a victim in this." He turned, and his eyes were a storm of anger, of hurt, and of something else I couldn't yet name. It looked like guilt, a guilt that felt entirely out of place to me, a burden he was carrying that he wasn't ready to share. He came back to the sofa and put his arm around me in that classic Lorenzo hug, the one he saves for when words are not enough. The very fact that he was speechless told me everything. We sat like that for a while, my head on his shoulder, his arm a solid weight as the city hummed outside, completely unaware that our world was about to implode. "What are you going to do?" he asked after a time. His voice had changed. It was softer, a brother asking, not commanding. "I'm still working out a plan," I murmured. He nodded, quiet again, before asking the one question that mattered. "Are you going to tell him?" "No," I answered instantly, without a trace of hesitation. That decision had been solidified on Tuesday. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He didn't challenge me. Not yet. I know my brother. He was just putting a pin in that fight for later. We stayed there for another 2 hours. He set out the food, handing me a fork with an unspoken command in his eyes. We ate in a silence that felt earned and complete. After a revelation of that magnitude, words become superfluous. When he left, he pulled me into an embrace at the doorway, holding on for a moment too long. Some deep instinct flagged it as a goodbye. Not forever, but the kind offered before someone does something they know you would never permit. Then the door clicked shut, and I was left in the profound solitude of the room. I was oblivious to the impending cataclysm. The truth would not hit me until long after the damage was done. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. My brother was on his way to do what I could not, to deliver a truth to Dante Viscari that no one else dared to speak. And I knew nothing, my world confined to the laptop's glow as I struggled to craft a resignation letter. Across the city, Lorenzo was moving, heading straight for the Viscari Holdings Tower. No appointment, no permission, and with no intention of showing respect. The story reached me in pieces. A brief account from Marco weeks later, then the full, unvarnished version from Lorenzo, who owned every second of it. He had walked up to reception, announcing urgent personal business. He spoke his surname with an inherent power that commands obedience, and it worked. Upstairs, the name Romano triggered a gut reaction in Marco Vital, who waved him through. Dante permitted the meeting for one reason. A scene in his 5-star lobby was unacceptable. A calculated, emotionless move. A profound silence filled the office as Lorenzo walked in. Dante was waiting, already on his feet. Marco witnessed him stand the instant the name Romano came over the intercom, a man preparing for a collision. Lorenzo, however, stepped into the room completely unfazed. The expensive suit, the breathtaking cityscape, the stare that had broken lesser men. It meant nothing to him. His world had taught him a simple rule: never let another man's aura diminish your own. The battle began with Lorenzo declaring who he was. Dante's response was a quiet, cold acknowledgement, the stillness of water over a violent current. Declining the offered chair was a clear statement of defiance. In return, Dante rooted himself to the spot, his body a portrait of contained energy, his stare a physical force. Then the calculated reveal. There was an air. The words struck a wall of perfect silence. Dante's composure remained absolute. His unnerving calm was not indifference. It was the suppression of a seismic internal event. Lorenzo continued his attack, rejecting any effort to reduce this to a business problem. He cut off every attempt to deflect, bringing the focus back to the person at its center by saying her name, Alicia. He then painted a raw picture of her private agony, the nights without rest, the food she could not keep down, the slow erosion of her spirit. She bears this weight by herself while you do what? Sign deals? Stare out at the city and hope the problem disappears? You don't understand any of this. I understand men like you completely. Lorenzo let the accusation hang in the air before landing his final devastating strike. You cultivate this persona of total control over the company, the choices, the staff. But when real accountability is demanded, you hide. You become the detached CEO, assuming reality will bend to your will. And Dante just stood there, taking it all in, utterly silent. This wasn't the silence of a man planning his countermove. It was the void left by a deep spiritual wound, inflicted by someone with nothing to lose. From the doorway, Lorenzo delivered his final, perfectly timed blow. She thought it was just one night, he said softly, looking away. That she was just another woman. A moment stretched. If that's the truth, just say so. I'll take on the duty you've abandoned. We feel Lorenzo is about to reveal everything. The texts, the mounting debt, the name, plastered across every collection notice, a name he identified much too late. He bites back the words. He leaves, planting a conversational explosive with a fuse only he controls. Dante is left alone in the office. 2 minutes later, Marco appears, as if on cue, a master of silently managing the aftermath of storms. He takes in the scene, saying nothing. Dante stood at the window, his refuge for sorting through turmoil. The city below, a machine that could offer perspective or amplify the void. Go, he commanded, and Marco vanished. For the first time in years, Dante Viscari was trapped with the raw reality of who he was. The words of a man with nothing to fear had him backed into a corner, offering facts without the mercy of a softer story. You act like you own it all, but when it's time to be accountable, you run. He remembered Alicia in Milan. That morning he put on his boss persona, incapable of being the man she'd slept with. To be him meant facing what they did, which meant confessing he had no idea what to do next. And feeling lost was the one emotional state Dante Viscari had dedicated his life to avoiding, using a self-control he had confused for power. He thought back over the past months, watching her calculated withdrawal. The way Alicia stopped staying late, how her words grew short and her eyes cold, creating a carefully constructed distance between them. He saw it as her decision, a line he had to respect, the kind of barrier a man without the right words can never cross. If you're waiting for her to come to you, you'll be waiting forever. He knew that already. He felt it in his gut long before Lorenzo said it, the familiar sickness of a destructive cycle repeating itself. Yet he did nothing, stranded on his side of the divide, hoping some outside event would fix it. His suit was perfect. His office, a fortress of control. The city hummed on, oblivious. Dante remained at the window for a long while. Then, without a sound, he came to a decision. Not to go to her, not to try and fix things right away, but to make the core choice that comes before all else. To stop pretending. To stop acting like what he felt was controllable, fleeting, or would vanish with time. It never did. The feelings had lingered for months, and he knew Elysia Romano was about to walk through his door, letter in hand. He understood it with the certainty of someone who has memorized how another person thinks. She thought she was coming to end things. She was deeply wrong. Chapter 8. You will stay, whether you agree or not. My intention was to quit. He revealed my pregnancy before I could speak. Then his next words turned my entire world upside down. For 3 days, that letter had been in my purse, written on Friday, edited Saturday, and proofread Sunday with cold editorial precision. It was perfect. It gave 2 weeks' notice, as the contract required. For the reason I put personal, intentionally non-specific, because I owed no one a confession I wouldn't put on paper. The letter was a masterpiece of polite, brief finality. Writing it was easy. Walking into his office was the hard part. I put it off for 3 days, making excuses, looking for a free moment on his schedule, trying to build the strength to see him without my face giving me away. For 3 days, I rode the elevator to the 10th floor, letter ready, and rode back down with it hidden. A complete and total loss of nerve. On Monday, I woke up with the sharp, chilling knowledge that it had to be done now, before my nerve broke again. I got to the office at my usual time, said hello to Carla, and made coffee. It was the same impeccable brew from the daily delivery, a habit I kept up to avoid the questions I'd get if I stopped. Really, I was running from having to give an explanation. I stood in the hall with the cup, staring at his door, and took a last shaky breath. Dante was by the window, turned away, his shoulders broad inside a perfect dark suit, but something about the way he stood stopped me. He wasn't just looking at the skyline. It was the posture of someone expecting something, someone aware I was there but choosing not to turn, exerting his usual mental command over the space. "Could I have a moment?" I asked. He turned around, his gaze locked onto mine for a long, electric second. I had memorized all of his looks, but this one was new in its power. It wasn't the gaze of a boss or the one he'd had in Milan. It was a look I had never seen before, and that novelty was terrifying because I was sure I had learned every single one. I offered the letter, my hands clenched around it as if to master the moment, and said, "I'm resigning." 2 weeks as contracted. The quiet that descended was a physical presence. Dante didn't reach for the paper. His stare was fixed on me. He stood motionless, his eyes locked with mine, and his voice turned to ice. "The reason, Romano, personal." His tone didn't lift, but it gained a razor's edge that severed all professional pretense. This was something else entirely. A motive. I wasn't obligated to give one. "You're pregnant." The silence that followed his statement lasted a full 6 seconds. My mind recorded each second while my body absorbed the systemic shock. I didn't confirm or deny his words. I just stood there, holding the letter as those moments landed like blows. My entire reality had been flipped upside down. A truth I recognized with a coldness that arrived before any feeling. "How did you know?" The question was a thread of sound, the only coherent thought I could assemble. His silence was the only answer I needed. Lorenzo. The name surfaced with the sickening clarity of a trusted signature on a document of betrayal. That hug, it had been a goodbye, waited with everything left unsaid. With Lorenzo gone, I had been so lost in my own storm that I'd been blind to the true currents at play. Dante began to move toward me. His pace was measured but heavy with intent, each step a declaration of certainty, not a question. It was the walk of a man who already knew the battle's outcome. He stopped right in front of me, shattering the boundaries of professional distance. The air between us vanished, and my entire nervous system flared at his nearness. I lifted my chin. The letter was still in my hand, the one thing in the universe I still controlled. "I don't want to be here anymore," I said, my voice sharpened by sheer will. "Your life is your own, as is mine." Dante was quiet, his gaze trained on me, not the paper, not my resignation, me. He looked at me with a raw intensity I knew was his truest self, the core that was exposed only when his formidable restraint finally broke. Then he spoke, placing each word with deliberate, chilling weight. "Whether you like it or not, you are staying." I opened my mouth to argue. "That child is mine." 4 words. 4 words spoken in a low, definitive tone that was neither a command nor a request. It was a statement of irrefutable fact, a certainty that needed no affirmation. It was the voice of a man who had already shaped the future and was now simply outlining the new reality. I met his stare, and he held it. In his eyes was a man I had never seen before. Not my employer, not the stranger from Milan, not the cold wall he had built. This was something more elemental, something that came before all of that. It was the unguarded Dante Viscari, the man I had seen once before and never thought I would see again. The paper in my hand felt simultaneously pointless and incredibly heavy. Pointless because the world it was meant for had disappeared. Heavy because I still held it, unable to let go. "You can't just," I started. "I am not being just anything," he cut in, his words sharp with the brutal directness that was his own version of honesty. "I am stating a fact." "A fact?" I countered, my voice cracking against my will. And in that moment, the fissure in his defenses appeared, a stress fracture born of immense, sustained pressure. She challenged him. "You vanished. You treated me like I was just staff. And now—" He cut her off. "I know what I did." 3 words. No rationalization, no justification, just a stark admission. She pressed her lips into a thin line, her throat tight, fighting to mask her response. "This doesn't fix anything," she managed. "No," he admitted. "But it's where we start." The space between them was thick with the ghost of Milan, the morning after, and 6 solid months of a quiet that neither— A delicate truce she had finally broken, a ceasefire whose terms were only now becoming clear. The entire unwritten agreement was visible in the void between her defiance and his unwavering stare. The letter, a relic from a former world, remained in her hand. Dante's gaze flicked to it for an instant before returning to her, his focus absolute. He applied no force, made no request. He simply stood there, a force of utter stillness, and waited. His uncharacteristic patience was more unsettling than his previous methods of control had ever been. Her independence was a fortress she had built piece by piece, the letter, an apartment a 20-minute drive away, a life she had designed herself. She knew these things, even as his unwavering gaze held her in place. Yet she did not leave. It was not a surrender to his power, nor an erasure of past betrayals. She stayed because his claim, "This baby is mine," was a truth so final that her body accepted it before her mind could wrestle with the fallout. And because for the first time, Dante Viscari had allowed his pragmatic mask to fall. Chapter 9. The Taking. It happened on a day of suffocating normalcy, the kind of day when old accounts are settled. In the weeks after their confrontation, she had stayed, justifying her inertia with the fraught logic of a heart in conflict. She was held there by his refusal to release her, a condition entirely separate from a desire to stay, and a universe away from admitting that the letter she carried was now a ghost. Their dynamic had found a tense, fragile equilibrium, a high wire stretched between unspoken truths and the echo of his claim. Lorenzo's appearance that Thursday was the herald of an oncoming storm. He was a shell of his former self, his easy smile a brittle imitation. Dark hollows of exhaustion circled his eyes. The wrinkles in his shirt, a small detail so alien to him, broadcast his inner collapse. The signals had been there for weeks, the hushed phone calls, the financial evasiveness, the temporary apartment that had been his home for 3 months. She had chosen to ignore them, a decision she was starting to regret. "The deaths," she said, cutting through his act. "Has it gotten worse?" "I have it under control," he snapped, the defensive edge in his voice cracking his composure. His eyes darted away, then locked back on hers. She held his gaze. "Lorenzo, tell me exactly what is happening." "This isn't your problem to carry." His tone was severe, a stark departure from his nature. "But you must be careful, do you hear me? Watch everything. And the car, with people, stay on high alert." "You're scaring me." "I'm being cautious." He gave her a look she knew was reserved for life and death. "Promise me you'll be vigilant." She promised, feeling the weight but not knowing the source. She would piece it together later when the violent, scattered fragments of the story aligned that he was already in over his head. He had gotten the warnings, the impossible terms. And then, a photograph of her, taken from a distance as she left work. Below it, a cold caption. "We know what she's worth to you both." He had said nothing, carrying the terror alone, believing he could shield her from the coming storm. Her doctor's visit was routine. The car waiting for her at the clinic was a perfect copy of Dante's. Same model, same color, even the license plate she knew by heart. Such a perfect copy is never a coincidence. It is the result of painstaking preparation fed by inside knowledge. It demands time, money, and perfect execution. The driver's wave seemed normal as she approached. He opened the door, saying her name with practiced ease. She got in, but in that second, she knew the smell was wrong. It didn't have the usual scent of leather and the cologne Dante's driver always wore. The upholstery felt different, a detail no one else would notice. She opened her mouth, but the moment was lost. The move was fast, sterile, done with the cold knowledge that perfection is invisible while flaws attract attention. They had taken out Dante's greatest weapon, his ability to react. She came to, bound to a chair. The room was cramped, the air stale. A low, artificial glow erased any concept of time. Her hands were tied behind her with expert knots, a sign of her captor's skill. Faced with a total threat, her mind defaulted to analysis. She started counting. 3 men in view, more moving outside the door. She listened, mapping the room's shape. No windows. 1 door locked from the outside. The air was controlled. This was a professional job, not some ruin. Then her mind locked on the child inside her. A final, untouchable anchor. She drew one deliberate breath, then a second, a calming ritual forged in a lifetime of turmoil. Her thoughts found Dante, not with the hope of a maiden needing a savior, but with the cold logic of someone who understood his very essence. This child is mine. A man who speaks those words with such force does not surrender what he claims. This was not faith. It was a tactical analysis. It brought her peace. At 2:00 in the afternoon, a second photo lit up Lorenzo's phone. It showed her bound to a chair, alive, uninjured, but undeniably a prisoner. Beneath the picture was a single, stark directive. You know who has our money. Go to him. Now. We are watching every move. And so, Lorenzo ran. He raced through the city, phone clutched in his hand, its screen a searing reminder of his disgrace. He burst into Viscari Holdings, gasping for air like a man buckling under a crushing load. Marco saw the pure terror in his eyes and, ignoring all protocol, escorted him straight upstairs. Dante was by the window as Lorenzo entered. When he turned, the agony on the brother's face made his body go rigid with a tension Marco had seldom seen. "Speak," Dante commanded, and the entire ugly truth came pouring out. He confessed it all. The intimidation, the escalating threats, the debt that had spun out of his grasp, and the sickening clarity that Victor Srokin was pulling the strings. He admitted to the first photograph of her, the one he hid for weeks with the hubris that he alone could fix this. Then he told him of the new picture. "I never dreamed they would use her," Lorenzo rasped, his voice finally breaking. "I swear I never saw this coming." Dante remained perfectly still. Lorenzo would later think of that stillness as the heaviest burden he had ever felt. It was not anger, it was the absolute containment of a man holding back a cataclysm. Then, the phone on his desk began to ring. The number was blocked. Dante grabbed the receiver before it could complete its first ring, his movement swift and certain. He knew the caller. The voice on the line was steeped in a cold, practiced calm, the kind engineered as a weapon. "Dante Viscari." A calculated pause. "I assume you are now aware of the girl's new accommodations." Dante's quiet was answer enough. Lorenzo Romano was the perfect instrument, Victor said, his voice flat with the pleasure of a plan executed. His debt was our way in, his sister our leverage, and you, another deliberate beat, were always the prize. Dante tilted his head toward the window, his profile etched from stone. "The terms are simple," Victor continued. "You will surrender the contested land. You will give up access. You will take on all of Romano's debt. Agree to this, and she is returned." The demand was unthinkable, not for its financial cost, but for the surrender of power it represented. It was a request for absolute defeat, a thing Dante would never entertain under any circumstance, except this one. "You have 2 hours," Victor warned. "After that, the price increases, and I can no longer guarantee her state, or that of the child." The line cut. The silence that filled the office was a new depth of dread Marco had never known in all his years. It wasn't rage. It was the thing that comes before it, something deeper, more primal. It was the silent fracture of a man who built his life on protecting his legacy, now staring at the chasm of failure. Lorenzo stood, pale as a ghost, finally seeing the devastating scope of his mistake. "Dante," he whispered, his voice in pieces, "I didn't know." "I know," Dante replied, his own voice low and sharp, yet empty of blame. He was already moving, his plan set in the instant Victor wrongly thought he had 2 hours to bargain. Marco would always describe the next 2 hours with the spare words of a man who had seen something he would never speak of again. Dante yielded no ground, refusing to sign any document. He mobilized 3 shadow contacts Marco would not dare to name and whose identities were never asked for. In less than 40 minutes, he had the warehouse location, a tally of the men inside, and proof that Victor was a freelancer, acting without syndicate approval. The threat was a house of cards. Dante, a master of dismantling such facades, took apart the entire enterprise well before Victor's 2-hour deadline. Reports from the raid came in scattered pieces. No shots were ever fired. Dante's men moved in a silent, 3-way pincer. A call from Victor's actual superior apparently came through mid-assault, forcing a sudden retreat just before Dante's team hit. After that, total quiet fell. A heavy stillness settled over the warehouse. The first thing she felt was the end of the ambient sounds she had gotten used to. Shuffling boots, low voices, the creak of a chair. The world's volume had been turned to 0. This new silence was not empty. It was charged with the palpable energy of a hurried retreat, a thick tension in the air. Something had occurred outside, but whether it was her salvation or her end was unknown, and this ignorance ate away at her. She kept perfectly still, evening out her breaths, directing her entire focus to the new life within her. That anchor was her only stability as she waited with the core strength of a woman left with only one option: to survive. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one a lifetime, until the door was finally forced open. Dante came through first, a lone figure in a dark suit, his body held taut. His walk, a rhythm usually as comforting to her as her own pulse, was wrong. It was rapid but precise, the practiced, lethal advance of a man deploying a strategy he had perfected in his mind 1,000 times. In less than 2 seconds, his eyes had swept and assessed the room before they found her, and in that moment their gazes locked. Her first read on his expression was not relief. It was something more fundamental, the look of a man who had prepared for the worst possible outcome and was now forcing his brain to accept what was real. Her, breathing. Her, unharmed. Her hand on her stomach, her gaze fixed on him, even with ropes binding her to the chair. Because Alicia Romano never backed down. He crossed the floor silently and dropped to one knee in front of her. That single movement, Dante Viscari kneeling, hit her with a power that destroyed her composure before she could even raise it. His hands moved to the ropes, and the knot seemed to simply give way to his touch. The instant the restraints were gone, he cupped her hands in his. He didn't squeeze, but simply held them, a deep warmth that felt like a vital nutrient she hadn't known she was missing. His eyes did a swift, methodical sweep of her body, a cold and desperate search for any injury his imagination had tortured him with for hours. He was still fighting the ghosts of what could have been. "You're all right," he breathed, the words more for himself, as if saying it aloud made it true. "I am," she said. His hand came up to her face, his thumb brushing her cheek as their eyes reconnected. And in their depths, she saw a vulnerability he had never shown her before. This was not the Don, nor the cold man from Milan. This was not the fortress he had built around himself, a fortification that was now nothing but dust. This was the man underneath, stripped of all his defenses, raw from the ordeal of the last few hours that had made any facade impossible. The moment passed in a breath. He stood, his hands on her waist to help her stand. He paused, just looking at her, as if he needed one more second to absorb that she was whole. In the car, a dense silence fell between them for 2 full minutes as she stared out the window. He watched the road, but the stress was still visible in the hard line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, and how his hand gripped his own knee, the last tremors of the war he had just fought inside himself. "You were afraid?" he stated simply. "Yes." "Of what?" She finally turned to see his profile. He kept his eyes ahead, but his question was heavy with the need for a real answer. She could have said many things. The grimy warehouse, the terrifying not knowing, any of them would have been easier, safer than the real one. "Of not seeing you again," she admitted softly. The silence that followed was different from all the others. A muscle jumped in his jaw, the hand on his knee lifted, moving slowly with immense purpose to cover hers where it rested between them. It stayed there. He held her hand for the rest of the drive to his home, and neither of them spoke of it. It was one of those fragile truths that grows best in quiet. Dante and Alicia had learned from bitter experience that words can sometimes diminish what is most real. That silent exchange was more than a memory, it became a foundation. Her words, a truth that shook the air between them, his answering stillness, the unyielding grip of his hand. These were the first stones of their foundation. Neither knew what they were building, only that the work had begun. Within 3 weeks of her rescue, his apartment had become her home. It was never discussed. It was an erosion of the walls she'd held up for so long, a collapse hastened by the kidnapping, by that confession in the car, and by one afternoon when the impulse to call him in her own empty apartment was met with the sharp, hollow ache of his absence. She never told him of that moment. She appeared with a single suitcase, and he made no mention of its meager contents. This was their way. Yet a language without words can only go so far, and in the second week they found its edge. At 3 a.m, she woke to the cold emptiness of his side of the bed. She found him by the living room window, phone aglow in his hand, wearing the face of the stranger she had first met, remote, unreachable. When she asked what was wrong, his reply was a clipped "work" in the same tone he'd used before Milan, a signal the door was now locked. She went back to their room, staring at the ceiling until dawn, wondering if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. The breaking point arrived as a conflict over Lorenzo's recovery, sparked by a bank statement she found. It wasn't the money she confronted him about, but the deception. Secrecy was the venom that had poisoned them before. If he was using old poisons in this new life, she had to know now. "I paid for it because it had to be done," he said, his voice flat. "You hid it because that's what you do," she countered. The silence that fell was the old, suffocating kind. She refused to breathe again. After a long moment, he spoke, the tension in his jaw preceding the words. "I don't know how to be different yet," he admitted, "but I am trying." It was a meager offering, but it was real. She was learning that with Dante, honesty was the only thing of actual worth. Lorenzo was at a clinic for men undone by gambling, an institution offering the rigid discipline he needed to fight his addiction. He had gone willingly this time, a reality she was still processing weeks later. Lorenzo had always been the protector, the one who bore the weight of everyone else with a tight smile and hugs that held on too long. This new version of him, a man admitting he was broken, was someone she was learning to see through a fog of both relief and grief, the kind you feel when you know salvation only came because the other option was complete destruction. Every Tuesday she visited him, a silent, steady fixture, knowing her brother craved routine over words. Dante was funding it all. She discovered this by accident, a statement tucked into a folder with the clinic's letterhead and his signature. She just stared at the paper, a slow heat kindling inside her that she refused to name. To name it was to own it, and she wasn't brave enough for that. She said nothing. He said nothing. It was their own dialect. Ideas passed between them unvoiced, which sometimes felt like not enough, and other times felt like absolutely everything. He came home one Wednesday evening and found her on the balcony. Below them, the city was a map of gold traced against a bruised purple sky. She was looking out, her hands resting on the rail, the soft swell of her pregnancy just becoming visible. A deep quiet had settled with the dusk, a kind of peace she'd nearly forgotten existed. She heard the door, then his tread on the floor, a sound she now knew in all its variations. She recognized the specific rhythm of his walk when he came looking for her first. He stopped in the doorway watching her, and in his guarded gaze, she saw something she could feel but not yet decipher. It was the look of a man seeing something he never anticipated, a sight that required a moment to reorder his world. He came to stand beside her, so close their arms nearly touched. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the space between them wasn't heavy, but calm. This wasn't the taut silence of things left unsaid, but the quiet of two people simply existing together. "Lorenzo called," she said. "I know. He told me he reached out to you before all this." A beat passed. "Said you were angry," she continued. "I was. That doesn't mean he was wrong." Dante turned to face her, his entire guard dissolving, leaving a rawness she had never witnessed. This was not the feared syndicate boss, the calculated charmer, or the executive who owned every room he entered. This was just a man, humbled by the sharp truth of his brother's words and still wounded by them weeks later. "He has a maddening gift for being right," Dante admitted. A laugh escaped her, bright and sudden. He watched her with an expression she knew, the look that said he was committing this exact moment to memory, filing away a feeling for which he had no words. The ensuing quiet wasn't a void, it was an arrival. "I was a fool," he said, stripped of the armor people wear around their deepest regrets. With you. After that night in Milan, she had seen her own heart and promptly built a fortress around it to survive the fallout. "It wasn't," she breathed. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't. You never said a word." "I know." His eyes held hers. "I let you believe you were just another woman, because what I felt was terrifying, and I had no words for it. So I fell back on the only thing I know how to do when I'm cornered." "You build a wall," she finished for him. "I build a wall," he confessed, utterly exposed. This was the raw truth he saved for moments of final consequence. "That doesn't erase the last few months," she stated. "No," he conceded, "but it's the truth, and you deserve that more than anything." He drew something from his pocket. It was a simple thing, not the kind of showy gem meant to catch the eye. It was a plain, dark gold band that seemed to hold a story. She would learn later it was a copy of his mother's ring, his only reference for such an act, and that choosing it had caused him more turmoil than any other decision that year. He held it out, but did not kneel. The gesture would have been a performance, foreign to his character, and she wouldn't have wanted it. A kneeling Dante wouldn't be real, and this moment had to be. I don't know the right way to do this, he said, his voice low, a tone so singularly his, in that one instant it could never be repeated. I have no idea how to be with someone without making it a battle for control. I don't know how to love in a way that isn't frightening, for them and for me. She let the silence hold. But I have learned one thing. His gaze sharpened, locking on her with that familiar intensity. The only time in my life I have ever been truly afraid was when you were gone. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know if I would get to you in time. You were counting, she whispered. Every single one. The knowledge didn't hit her like a blow. It settled over her the way the deepest truths always do, slowly and then all at once. Dante Viscari, a man whose life was built on control, on emotional fortification, on needing no one, had been counting every minute she was missing. He didn't try to slide the ring onto her finger. He placed it in her open palm with a slow, deliberate weight. It was the difference between an order and a question, between claiming her and letting her choose. Stay, he said. Not for the child, not because I'm telling you to, but because I am asking you. You hate asking, she noted. I do, he confirmed, with an honesty so stark it was almost funny. This is as close to a proposal as I'm going to get, isn't it? For now, he countered, a new humor appearing as his armor fell away. I suppose you could get better with practice. She laughed, a real light sound that only happens when you're with the person you are meant to be with. He watched her with the same look from the bistro in Milan, an expression she now understood completely. It was the face of a man who had just discovered the one thing he wanted to see for the rest of his life. She slipped the ring onto her own finger. You're going to need a lot of practice, she told him. His hand came to rest on her stomach, slow and intentional, with a tenderness that was still new to him, but a currency he was finally willing to spend. His hand stayed there, a warm, solid weight over the place their child grew, oblivious to the storm of its parents. We have time, he said. We have time. Her brother's words echoed in her mind. Dangerous, a manipulator, a man who could not be controlled. He was right about all three. He was only wrong about one thing. He thought those qualities would drive her away. Instead, they were the very reason she stayed. She didn't know it then, but in choosing him, she was saying yes to all the beautiful chaos that would come. This is Lena, and while that is the end of Book 1, my work on Book 2 is already done. Entry is available for a most modest price. The missive arrived without a sender. She broke the seal, expecting business, another dry contract to endure. Yet within lay a hidden history, dates, files, secret messages, ending in a single handwritten line. The script was foreign, but it carried the chilling calm of one who knows they are about to burn a world to cinders. He was not just aware of your brother's financial ruin. He was its architect, maneuvering Lorenzo into the very trap that led to your capture. Ask him why. The document drifted from her hand. Her eyes moved from the ring on her finger to her own stomach, to the door where Dante remained. Ignorant that she held the proof, the man who begged her to remain was the puppet master of her suffering. What Dante offered was no salvation. He merely pulled her from a cage he had constructed. And for the first time since agreeing to be his, she wondered if this gilded world was ever meant for her. This, as you've likely guessed, is just a whisper from Book 2. The entire uncut story awaits through the top link in the pinned comment. I will join you there shortly. That first link leads directly to the complete second novel, entirely free of ads or disruptions. It's that easy. I cherished creating this next chapter, and with your profound support, there will be more. On that site, you will find narratives that explore far more profound and intense territory. This is authentic dark romance, raw and unfiltered. Given that the material is considerably more adult, I cannot share it on public YouTube. This private space allows me to deliver my full creative vision and produce my most powerful work for you. As a note, this channel is no longer monetized. This project is the only way I can support my team and continue creating these high-quality narratives. More information will be coming soon. I will look for you there through the first link in the pinned comment. Regrettably, we have battled many instances of individuals pirating our audio, stealing the story, and simply reposting it on YouTube.
Life lesson: unresolved trauma often disguises itself as control, attachment, or self-sacrifice. From a psychological standpoint, the most compelling feature of this case is not the criminal environment. It is the emotional patterning beneath it. The male subject presents traits consistent with grandiose control adaptation. He is not merely powerful, he is organized around power as identity. Such individuals often interpret uncertainty as threat and vulnerability as loss of status. Consequently, when authentic attachment emerges, they do not process it relationally, they regulate it defensively. In simpler terms, he does not move closer when he cares more. He builds stronger walls. This explains the abrupt emotional coldness after intimacy. To an outside observer, the behavior appears contradictory. In clinical language, it is entirely coherent. Attachment activated fear, fear activated control, control manifested as distance. What looked like indifference was in fact dysregulated attachment wearing the mask of composure. The female subject demonstrates a complementary but equally significant pattern: high-functioning emotional suppression. She remains operational under stress, interprets endurance as strength, and delays vulnerability until crisis forces disclosure. This is common in individuals who have survived instability by becoming reliable, useful, and self-contained. Her error is not weakness, it is over-adaptation. She assumes that because she can carry pain, she should. The brother figure introduces yet another psychological layer: the protector complex fused with guilt. He attempts to control external danger while withholding key information, likely under the belief that selective secrecy is a form of protection. It is not uncommon for protective personalities to become indirect agents of catastrophe precisely because they cannot tolerate appearing helpless. Therefore, the life lesson is clinically precise. Trauma that remains unnamed will reorganize relationships in destructive ways even when intentions are loving. One person becomes controlling, another becomes silent, another becomes overprotective. Each believes they are preventing collapse. In reality, they are co-authoring it. Most viewers are inclined to ask, who was wrong? A more useful question is, what coping strategy became dangerous once love entered the system? The answer is all of them. Healthy love requires capacities none of these subjects initially possess in stable form: transparent communication, tolerance of uncertainty, and the ability to ask rather than command. Until those capacities develop, affection becomes fused with fear, and rescue becomes merely the dramatic correction of damage that emotional maturity might have prevented.